Hello everyone, I'm glad to meet you again on our channel, and today we are starting to study ethology. This is the science of animal behavior, and today we have the first topic. As you can see, we will discuss some organization issues and a general idea of the ethology, its history of development and the methods that are used. As you know, we usually use some video from the YouTube, and usually at the end of this class I leave the homework from the book. And in general, you know, we have our classes on the Department of Physiology and Biochemistry of Animals of the State Biotechnological University. And this is a part of the teachers of our department. It's me, candidate of biological science, associate professor and philosophy doctor Vadopiano Larissa, and our department. And we will meet with you online and on the YouTube channel, also on the Moodle platform. You can use the materials posted by the teacher Ina Kostyuk, philosophy doctor and associate professor of our department. As usual, I leave the links on our YouTube channel, Physiology of Animals, and you can find here playlist Ethology and our Moodle platform. As usual, we will have the plane, and it's part of theoretical classes, lecture course. And not so much topics we have for this semester, and practical classes. You see here we have two module tests, final for the first module and for the second module, and check your understanding of this subject, and of course the books. Of course, we need a lot of books, different, and I will upload several books, basic books for the platform. Usually I leave homework information at the end of each video and write down which chapter I recommended to reading, and some more information for those you can find here, because the ethology, it is like a part of physiology of animals, high nerve system, and you see the ethology is an important disciplinary science that combines physiology, zoology, ecology and animal psychology. It's video, this is a video from our channel, but all our videos on the channel will contain information in a combined form of part of the lecture and practical videos, or links to the additional materials from the studying for the studying of this subject, and I usually use the video from the YouTube, you know, who study physiology with us. And here it is like example how I use the books. I just give you information in what book and what chapter I think it's better to use this book and read this chapter. So let's start from what is this ethology. It is the scientific and objective study of animal behavior, usually with a focus on behavior under natural conditions, and behavior as an evolutionary adaptive trait. And here we see the behaviorism is a term that also describes the scientific and objective study of animal behavior, usually referring to measured response to the stimuli or trained behavioral response in a laboratory context. So we have two science, ethology and behaviorism, study in this laboratory context and in natural condition and nature. And what we have, ethology is combination of laboratory and field science with a strong relation to some other disciplines such as neuroanatomy, of course physiology of animals, ecology, and evolutionary biology. And ethologists are typically interested in a behavioral process rather than in a particular animal group, and often study one type of behavior such as aggression and a number of unrelated animals. And we just start from the introduction and definition, the way the animals interact with other organisms and with the environment, change in the activity of an organism in response to a stimulus, and the study of behavior, of course ethology, and orientation of sunflower, for example, just towards the sun. It is the ethology too, but it is for all organisms on our earth. Of course, we will take the higher level of animals for home animals, cats, dogs, and in general, the behavioral, it is all over the world, all over in all live organisms. So, what we have in history, of course, from the Aristotle. He was a pioneer in the field of behavior, and in some times until the 19th century the most common theory among scientific was still the concept of scala naturae, and it was posted by Aristotle. According to this theory, living beings were classified on an ideal pyramid that represented not living things such as minerals, stones for sediment, and the simplest animals on the lower levels with complexity increasing progressive towards the top. And of course the humans in the Western world of the time, people believed animals, species were eternal and immutable, created with a specific purpose, as this seemed the only possible explanation for the incredible variety of living beings and their surprising adaptation to their habitats. Here we see this picture, and here we see the stones, just plants, and of course animals, and not so high levels, the humans, and even angels, and on the topic, of course, the God, and Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was the first biologist to describe a complex theory of evolution. His theory substantially comprised two statements. First, that animal organism and behavior can change according to the way they are used. And the second, that those characteristics can transmit from one generation to the next generation. No, we know that it is genetically, but in this time, of course, it was the first time, just only first theory. The example of the giraffe, whose neck becomes longer while trying to reach the upper leaves on the trees, is well known. The second statement is that every living organism, humans included too, tends to reach a greater level of perfection. And then, Charles Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, and he was well aware of Lamarck's theories and was influenced by them. And even, this picture, the photo Charles Darwin, and it has his theory, and all ethologists is considered etopic biology. Ethologists have been consulted particularly with the evolution of behavior and the understanding of behavior in terms of the theory of natural selection. In one sense, the first modern ethologist was Charles Darwin. Those book, the expression of the emotion in men and animals too, influenced by ethologists. He pursued his interest in behavior by his protege George Romance, and who investigated animal learning and intelligence using methods, and we will discuss about all these methods in our next classes. So, social ethology and developments. In English, ethologist Cook. He published an important paper in which he discussed about comparative ethology from social ethology. And then there were several works in which the famous comparative ethology from social ethology, and claimed that much of the ethology that had excited so far has really comparative ethology, examining animals as individuals. Whereas in the future, ethologists would need to concentrate on the behavior of social groups of animals, the social structure within them. And here we see the founders of the field of animal behavior and Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Due to the work of the Lawrence and Timbergen, ethology developed strongly in continental Europe. During the years period to the Second World War and after the war, Timbergen moved to the University of Oxford, and ethology became stronger in the United Kingdom, and with the additional influence of William Thorpe, Robert Hindle, and Patrick Batterson, the sub-department of animal behavior of the University of Cambridge. In this period, too, ethology began to develop strongly in North America, and so Lawrence, Conrad Lawrence, Timbergen, and von Frisch were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in the year 70s for their work of developing ethology. So now we have the ethology is now a well-recognized scientific discipline and has a number of journals covering developments in the subjects such as animal behavior, animal welfare, applied animal behavioral science, behavioral ecology, and Journal of Ethology, and Just Behavioral Journal. And now we have another name, zoopsychology. What is this? Zoopsychology is a discipline related to the biological and physiological science and psychology science, which studies the sight and behavior of animals, and its formation holds of the second floor. Century, the first topic of the psychological research was the study of the animal intelligence, and one of the first book on this, its topic Animal Intelligence by the Romans, we said about it. And what we have Zoopsychology is the science of mental activity of animals, its manifestation and development in species and individual aspects. And the zoopsychology, it will be the second part of our discipline. It is a module number 2. But just we start from the ethology and move to the zoopsychology, and we will start to study mental activity, reflex and representation of the world by animals and the attitude to it, which is manifested in external behavior. And we study mental activity terms like the reaction for a living being to events in the external and internal environment. In practical terms, mental activity can be understood as a set of intellectual processes and emotional states. So, psychology is a field that has unapplied aspects for practical psychology, and the object of the science is the mental activity of the animals and the full complex of manifestation of behavior and psyche, and the only process of mental reflection as the product of external activity of animals. And the subject of zoopsychology is the formation of behavior and mental process in animals, and the development of behavior through the life or life of organism. So what we have a little bit more. We have ethology and zoopsychology, two parts of our discipline, and they are related to ecology from the Greek environment and housing, or it's like a science that studies the patterns of relation between organism and the environment, as well as the organization and activity of super system like a population, science, and biospheres. And environmental reaction often affect the behavior of animals, like a goat tend to heat or go to sleep, but there are other instinctive reaction reasons for detecting interspecific behavioral reactions that are associated with reproduction, feeding offspring, feeding food, and more and more. So, in general, what we have? Historically, we have two schools that study behavior. From the Aristotle and Darwin, we had two ways. From the United States, and you know this name, Skinner and Pavlov, of course. In United States, we have the behaviorism, and in Europe, its names Lawrence, von Frisch, Timbergen, and all these Nobel Prize laureates, and they study ethology. And you know, in our times we have this modern animal behavioral way and science, and in the United States we have the comparative psychology. So we start from the behavior, of course, from the behavioral, and move to psychology. It's more high level of the behavioral of animals. As you remember, on this slide we separated two definitions of behavior that are studied in nature, ethology, and behaviorism, its laboratory context. And we start from the laboratory context and start to study what ways the scientist can study the animal behavior in general. So we have the slide about types of animal behavior, and we have two parts. It's innate behavior and learned behavior. Let's see, that is the learned in each case. And here we see the first primitive forms of the behavior, innate behavior, and further this to the reflexes. Tropism, taxis, kinesis, it is very primitive forms of the behavior. And then we start to move on the learned behavior, habitation, associate learning, trial and error, insight, imprinting, reasoning. And so here we see the innate behavior, like we see from the primitive organisms, and the more high level, like unconditioned reflexes and instincts. So when a particular kind of stimulus produces the same types of response in the whole life, and also call it as the stereotyped or inborn or inherited behavior. It's all words is synonyms, are synonyms. And here we see the description. What is this tropism, what is taxis, and all types. I said that the flowers can move to the sunlight, and of course it is the behavior too, but not for animals, for plants. Tropism, a part of an organism, moves in response to the stimuli, for example, just sunlight or just roots of plants. And two types. Tropism, we have the phototropism, and moves in response to the light, and geotropism moves in response to the gravity. And the taxis, it's more complete word, and we have the phototaxis too. Directed orientation, movement of a motor organism in response to the stimulus. For example, in Glena I have even a picture better than now. I have this Glena move towards the light source. At this have the special part which contact with the light and moves the organism to the light. And for example, the earthworms moves away from the light source, and you see the types of taxis, of course. Thermotaxis, phototaxis, phono, hemo, geo, and we have the even more positive taxis, movement toward, and negative taxis, movement away from. And one more, kinesis, speed of the organism influenced by stimulus, and for example, movement of the flares influenced by wavelength of light, and automatic and voluntary and unconditioned repeat response of the body to stimulus. For example, you all know this reflex, knee-jerk reflex, and starts from the basic form of organization of behavior for a higher forms of organism. Like we said, we have the two higher forms. It's unconditioned reflex and fixed action patterns. And here we see the innate behavior. It's behavior that genetically hardwired in the organism and can be performed in response to the cue without prior experience, inborn behavior. And we have two higher forms of inborn behavior: unconditioned reflex and instincts. And what we have, for example, infant or newborn reflexes, it's without any experience, unconditioned reflex, and for example, it's palmar reflex, walking stepping reflex. And for instincts examples, it's just building the nests by birds. Nobody do it in previous. It's fixed action patterns, like inside. So discuss about all forms of this inborn reflex and instincts. Especially the fixed action patterns is a predictable series of actions triggered by a cue, sometimes called the QK stimulus, and so a fixed action pattern is more complex than a reflex. It's still automatic and involuntary. Once triggered, it will go on to completion, even if the key stimulus is removed in the meantime. And here we see the instinctive does not change over the course of the organism life. Once initiated, exposed to the stimulus, proceed to completion of the behavior triggered by the same stimulus, external cause that brings about the behavior. And examples: 3-spotted stickback fish and body birds opening their mouth, and keep those chicks picking beaks of parents, a lot of. So, and one investigation of this kind was the study of the wiggle dance language in bee, and you know this name, Carl von Fish. And Lawrence, of course, developed the theory of the evolution of animal communication based on his observation of fixed action patterns and circumstances in which they are expressed. So here we see this Carl von Fish. It's pioneer studies on bee communication, and it demonstrates that honeybees have color vision at first, and honeybees use a dance language to communicate with location of resources to other bees, and just his work in the field. And Nicholas Timbergen was a Dutch biologist and ornithologist, studies birds, of course. He did an experiment on the food-being behavior of the heron chicks, which later on became the base for studying animal behavior. And you see, he studies the wasps. Just demonstrates that bigger wasps use visual landmarks to just to locate their nests. And if you want to know more about this, I just will leave the links in the description to this video. It's very interesting, and his famous 4 questions to scientists, exactly, it's here. Nico Timbergen argued that ethology always need to include 4 kinds of explanation in any instance of behavior. It's first function, causation, development, and evolutionary history. So I will post the links to the video and these questions. Next one, scientist Konrad Lorenz was an Austrian zoologist, ethologist, and ornithologist, and he has a Nobel Prize in Physiology of Medicine with Nicholas Timbergen and Carl von Fish. And even here we see this picture, it's photo. He works in Columbian University and Vienna, and also he's often regarded as one of the founders of the modern ethology and study of animal behavior. He developed an approach that began with the other generation, including his teacher Oscar Hilton. Here are the founders. And leading specialist in behaviorism here, and especially in learning behavior. So we start from the learning behavior, based on the experience. So innate, it's not based on the experience, it's just based on the genetic, and learned behavior based on experience. Modified by individual, by trial and error, affected by environment, high variation in population, capacity to learn is product to natural selection, and examples, like domesticated behavior in pets, training dolphins to perform some. And now we will discuss the work of these scientists and move on to the methods with which they worked. And here we see the several names, and we will probably start with the Skinner's works. You see the photo of the Skinner's box. And here we see what the Skinner box is. The Skinner's operant condition chamber, also called a Skinner box, was designed to teach rats how to push a lever, and his behavior is not neutral to rats, of course. So operant conditioning with the positive and even negative reinforcement were performed in order to teach the behavior. And positive reinforcement, a rat was awarded with food when he pressed on the lever, and negative reinforcement, a rat was able to turn off electric shock produced by the floor. Here we see this electricity when he pressed the lever. And so we have these two descriptions about the negative reinforcement with the electricity and the positive reinforcement with the price, some price. I think it was a cheese, I think. So the operant or instrumental reflex, this is a Skinner's photo, and if you want to know about it a little bit more, I will leave the links to the description of classical operant conditioning and operant conditioning, like classical methods of the Skinners. And now they are still going on. All these methods we use for studying the behavior of different animals. You see, even not so high level nerve system animals, and of course for humans too. So let's start from the this slide, and these are classical instrumental or laboratory studies. If you want to know more, I even leave the links to these experiments of the Pavlov. Of course, the works of Ivan Pavlov can be considered classic of the laboratory study of the high nerve system activity. And I think you remember our practicals in animal physiology. It is the basic of animal physiology of high nerve system. And what he studied habitation and associative learning. His study. Associative learning in animals' behavior is any learning process in which a new response becomes associated with a particular stimulus. The first studies of associative learning were made by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. Examples of associative learning include when the goldfish swims to the water surface when a human is going to feed it, or the experiment of a dog whenever it sees a leash as a prelude for a walk. Of course, you know all this. And one more scientist So what we are going to study. One more scientist, Wolfgang Kochler. This physiologist conducts experiments in which insight learning was observed by the animal behavior, and there is one another term, epiphany, which describes insight learning, a sudden relation or awareness during seemingly chaotic date. In so summary, as per epiphanies and insight learning, it's immediate learning without trial and testing, just factor influence, insight learning, intelligence, learning situation, repetition and generalization. And here we see the photos of chimpanzee, which was in Kochler's experiments. Sultan, its name Sultan. And if you want to know more, I will leave the links to this video about Sultan experiments. In nature, it's the same. So it is almost all about history and methods. And so what are we going to study? What is ethology? Ethology is the science biological study of behavior of animals. Behavior usually study under the natural conditions. And term ethology, divided from the Greek word habit of convention or character and area of knowledge, logos, of course, also called an animal behavior and behavioral biology, animal psychology. It is the two ways in science, almost the same, but I want to start from the behavioral and we move to the psychology of animals. In behavioral results as a reaction to a stimulus. A stimulus can be different, internal or external from the environment, and it can be hunger, just sound, it can be pain or visual cues, and even hormonal changes inside the body. And what kind of behavioral we will study in this discipline? We will study ethology and behavioral and all stimulus, and as you see, the stimulus can be very different and the behavior can be very different too. And here I move some slides about types of behavioral. Each types we will study our classes for types of behavior, foraging, parental care, and reproductive behavior, and more, and territorial behavioral, and social behavioral, and migration, very different kinds of, and even resting and sleeping, it's the behavioral too. So it is the last slide of this practical, almost last, and I want to remind you about your homework for today in book in Introduction to the Animal Behavior. We have the chapter 1, and you should read the pages from the 1 to 32. It's your homework for today. And of course I will leave the links to the video from the physiology nerve system. Especially it's very interesting to know what parts of the brain and how it works with each other, and all these links about the videos which we discussed in this class. So see you later. Bye bye.